Hello there, and thanks so much for joining me for another tutorial. I'm Erin Eno, and today we're going to be painting two light and airy loose watercolor flowers. This is a practice for me to kind of refrain from using too much color, which when I get a look at my palette with all those colors, I tend to get carried away. So if you are like me and do the same thing, then this is perfect for you. If you do like this video, guys, don't forget to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Let's jump in and get started. Today I'm using my Baohong Academy cold pressed watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, 100% cotton. I have my Royal Talons Van Gogh paints in my palette, a jar of water and a paper towel, and I'm using my Princeton Neptune brushes today. I have one in a size 12, 4, and 8. They're all round. And let's just jump in and get started at these flowers. So the first one I want to do is just a very light kind of bluish purpley gray. I'm just going to use some Payne's gray, and because everything's light, I'm just going to keep a light wash on hand. Okay, so I'm going to throw a little bit of ultramarine deep in there just to give it a bluish kind of gray tinge, and maybe just the slightest touch of permanent blue violet. I don't want to overdo that, so I'm going to take some off my brush. Okay, so that's that. I'm just going to mix up a little bit more. Okay, and I just want, like I say, the lightest wash. Okay, so I'm going to take all that pigment off my brush, and I'm just going to wet it and go in and get some of that pigment. And we're just going to start with really loose, kind of fluffy petals. I'm just going to do two kind of deliberate petal shapes, and be sure to leave some white space in the middle. It's kind of important in this case. Then I'm going to go back in and just do some kind of crazy petals with just these really rough kind of whooshing kind of shapes. Okay, not being too concerned about the petal shapes. So I hope you can see that it's very light. It's going to dry lighter, which is what I want. So I'm going to put my size 12 brush aside, and I'm going to grab my size 8. And I'm just going to a smaller brush just so I know I don't put a lot of pigment on. So it's just damp, and I'm going to go into that pigment that I mixed, but not that really light wash. I'm going to go into the heavier mixture, and I'm just going to tap in here just towards the center of the flower. You can go up the sides a bit. That might have been a bit much. Okay, then I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush and just kind of drag some of this out. I don't want to go too heavy at this point because this is an exercise in light flowers after all. Another thing I want to do is just pop in some other colors. So while it's still damp, I've got a mixture of permanent, what have I got? No, Azo Yellow Medium and Yellow Ochre. So it's not a real bright yellow, but I'm just going to take the tip of my brush, just tap some in a couple spots. I'm even going to go in and take my quinacridone rose and just get a really light wash of that. Clean off my brush, just go get a little bit of it and tap some of that in some spots. So this is keeping it light, but just giving it a little bit of interest by popping in some other colors. Okay, being careful to leave that center white. So now I'm going to go back in, clean this number 8 brush off again, go back into this bluish gray color, going with a little deeper color this time, and I'm just going to tap some in here, just towards the center. Okay, and then I'm going to clean off my brush, take all the water off of it, and start dragging some more of this heavier pigment up. Being careful not to overwork it. Okay, you can even take some more of the light wash and just do some kind of wisps up towards the top. And then what I'm also going to do is go back in with that heavier pigment. And you've seen me do this a lot of times in my videos, I'm sure. But I'm just going to take the back end of my brush and just drag this up. And when you do this, follow the curve of the petals, okay? And you'll see this paint start to seep into these creases that I'm creating with my brush handle, and that just adds a little bit of texture while just still allowing it to be really light and kind of airy. And then you can just play with it from there. If you think it could use maybe a little bit more pink in some spots, but remember, be very careful to overdo it. This is why I'm using a small brush. I don't want to just jump in with a lot of pigment. My brush is pretty dry here, so wherever I put the pigment, it's going to stay until I kind of just drag it out. And these are just little hits of more color. Okay, so now what's going to bring it all together is a sepia center. And this is going to be pretty thick paint because I don't want it to bleed too much, but I do want it to bleed in some areas. And I'm not going to fill in the entire white space. Okay, I want to leave a little bit of a highlight in this center, so you don't want to fill the whole thing in. Okay, and you do want it to bleed in some spots, just for some kind of texture and shape. So that's that. And if it's not bleeding, you can coax it to bleed, but be very careful if you do that. Okay, so just hit it with some water in some spots, just so it bleeds a little bit. This will continue to bleed, so keep an eye on it. You don't want it to bleed too much. And that's that. So I think we need a little stem and some flowers on this guy, or leaves on this guy. So I'm going to get some sap green. I don't want a real bright color again. And I'm going to mix in some olive green, just to tone it down a bit. And maybe just to give it a little bit of a bluish color. I'll get that ultramarine deep and put some of that in there. Just going to tap the excess water off my brush. Just do a little, maybe a little flower. How many times am I going to say flower? Leaf coming out of here. I don't want to overdo it with the leaves, and I don't want them to be too heavy. Okay, so just kind of rough, wispy shaped leaves. Okay, don't overthink that, because I can have a tendency to overwork my leaves as well. And then we'll put maybe another one out here. I don't like that, it's fat already. I'm gonna mop that guy up. Let's try this again. Let's just do 2 leaves coming right out. I won't worry about a stem or anything. Okay, so we're just going to keep these fairly light as well. And that's it. You can put a stem on that if you want to kind of ground it a little more, but I think I'll just leave it at that. You know what? I'm just going to put one more leaf in. Just out here, just to make it not so contrived, I think. There. So that's it. So you can see the sepia's bled a little bit, but it's stayed crisp in other areas, and it just kind of gives it a little bit of pop. Now, if you do think your flower is still a little flat, which I think this one may be just a touch flatter than I would want, I'm just going to go in and put in another little hit of this gray, or purpley gray. It is really kind of purple. Okay, so I'm just putting in a couple of patches of it, and then I'm going to clean off my brush, tap it off on my paper towel, and just kind of work this up a bit so it doesn't look so harsh. And maybe we'll put in a little bit on this guy here, because it would have a little bit of a shadow maybe. Okay, and you can just blend it out, still keeping it soft. Okay, and that's it. So let's go and do another one in another color. And I think maybe we'll do a pink one. See how that goes. So I've got the quinacridone rose here in my palette already. And I'm just going to add it to this gray that I have left. Because I don't want this to be a true bright pink either. I think I need more than that. A little bit more of the Payne's gray. It's still a little too purple for my liking. Let me see what that looks like. It's pink enough. Okay, and again, I'm just going to do 2 petal shapes that's a little bigger than, or a little darker than I wanted. Just going to pick some of it up. Now I'm using my Princeton Neptune because it is very soft and just kind of helps you paint really loose. So if you're using something that is a little stiffer, you may have to work a little harder on just trying to keep your petals loose and not so deliberate. Okay, and then same thing, we're just going to do some odd kind of wispy, curved, crazy petals, because this is loose, not quite abstract, but I want it nice and loose. Just like that. Okay, then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my number 4. Did I say 2 earlier? I don't know. And I think I actually used my 8 last time, but I'm just going to stick with my 4. Go in and get some of the yellow. Just tap it in a couple of spots. Now I'm going to go back into the deeper pink. Tap it in the center. Remember to leave white space for that center, okay? I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush and just kind of drag some of this paint out, like so. Going to take the back of my brush. I'm not going to use that brush because I know it's got a really sharp point on the back. And I'm just going to drag it following the curve of the petals, and you'll see those lines develop. And they'll be very subtle because the color's not that dark. Okay, then I'm going to go in and maybe just grab a little bit of that Payne's gray just to give this a little bit of a grayish tinge. And I'm just going to pop some of it in, just in very few areas. Okay, then go back to this pink, but it's a little more concentrated now. I'm not watering it down, and I'm using a smaller brush, so that helps me control how much water is on there. And I'm going to come up to some edges. I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush, just blend some of this out. If I think I've gone a little too far, I'm just going to take my paper towel and dab some of it up here. Sorry, the lighting's really bad. Okay, I think I want to bring a little bit of this pink, just a little further up in some of them. You can even bring some down from the top if you want. Okay, I think this one can stand to have a little bit more yellow in it. So I'm just going to tap a little bit of yellow here and there. Just gives it a little bit of life. Still being careful not to overdo it. Now we're going to go in and do the sepia center. Remember, pretty thick paint because you don't want it to bleed too much. And always leave some sort of highlight on one edge of it, just so it has some life and doesn't look really kind of flat. But you do want it to bleed. This is really thick because this is wet and it should still be bleeding, so I'm just going to help it along a bit with some water. Okay, and that should bleed out now. Here we go. Now again, you can go back in with another hit of the pink to add some kind of shading to it if you want. Just be careful not to get carried away. And then we'll go in and do some leaves with my size 8. Again, some sap green, some olive green, a little bit of ultramarine deep. Make these ones a little bluer this time. I think I'll come up here. Maybe do, you know what, I'm going to put a stem on this one just so we can see what that might look like. And I don't normally mind when the stem bleeds into the flower, but I don't want it to happen in this case. My stem got away from me there, so I'm just going to see if I can pick that up a bit. And this is drying unevenly, so you just go in with a damp brush and kind of spread it around a bit. We can also use the back end of our brush to add some lines on the leaves. Like so. And this one, I know I don't want to risk overworking this because that's what this was all about, but I am finding that this flower is starting to look a little flat. Like it's almost like it's got no leaf or no petal definition. So just put a little hit of some purpley pink in there. Okay, and then pick almost all of it up with a damp brush. Just like that. Okay, that's enough just to give it a little more. So there you go. There are 2 light and airy loose watercolor flowers. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful, and I hope you'll give it a try. I really enjoyed this because I do need a lot of practice in not overworking and not just flooding things with color. So anyway, that's it for now, guys. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.